Let's talk about Graveyard Shift by ML Rio. Let me start on a positive and say that the concept of this, a horror that takes place in the early hours of the morning and all of our characters are exclusively insomniacs, I like that. And I think in the hands of a more competent author, that could deliver a really scary and interesting story. What we got instead is a very unmemorable, very half baked novella that I like that it takes itself less seriously than If We're Villains, because the tone of that book is so insufferable. Like, that book thinks that it is the sweetest thing since pudding pie, and it's like, oh, mm-mm. What does carry over from her previous work is the way that it felt quite pretentious, particularly when her characters will exposition about the most random things. And the way that they talk about these topics, they just sound so like overly pseudo intellectual, and you're reading it and you're just like, ugh, is this based in reality? Is it? Yes, we have a cast of 5 characters. They're essentially the Scooby Gang. It's not more complicated than that. They don't have any sort of interesting quirks to their personalities. They're just Mystery Inc. And they are investigating a newly dug grave plot in the cemetery. And they catch someone putting lots of dead rats in it, and yeah, the whole thing very much feels like an advanced reader copy, because once I got to the end of it, I was so confused. I was like, oh, there's not more story. That's the end. Like, it really cliff dives, and at the expense of any like storytelling or character development, it just ends. And it was like, oh, okay, like, is this a part one? Is this a book series? It was just so strange. It was like, no, it's just a threadbare novella. Why? For what? Why not just make it bigger? The author was talking about how she had like difficult circumstances in her personal life, and she sort of wrote this through them, which I like, but then also don't feel pressured to release it prematurely. Maybe let it cook for a little longer, add some more content to it, because this just felt so like unfinished. There's this whole section where one of the characters is like in the university library, because like the whole thing happens around a campus, and she's trying to research this mysterious fungus species that seems to, like, the bad guys are like using it for some sort of anti-insomnia therapy, etc. But the reason I bring this up, her whole research was so suspicious. Like, the way it's written, the way that the research papers are quoted, it was very much like, oh, this is a liberal arts student's interpretation of how you do like research, you know? Like, I know that's so rude, but I was just reading it and I couldn't stop smirking at it, because it was like, oh, this is your scoping search. This is you identifying your key terms. Like, they look at the study for all of 5 seconds and they pull these quotes, and they're so unacademically written. Like, no peer reviewed paper would ever present information in this way, and it was making me cackle. I was like, oh, this is schlock. Like, am I supposed to be howling at this because it's so unserious and so unscientific? Like, I was getting flashbacks to lessons in chemistry where it was like, I fear you're talking about a subject that you are not familiar with. And to people who are familiar with it, it's camp. It's high camp. Oh, and then later on in the story, so there's this one character who's like a gravedigger and they need answers from him. And so, in order to get these answers, they spike the man's drink so that he's unconscious, abduct him in a car, like, and then once they got their answers from him, they dump him out on like the highway in like the dead cold of night where he could get hypothermia. And the whole book is so casual about this, like this very real, like, criminal assault. And it was wacky to me. I was like, oh, so these characters are meant to be the good guys who are like sleuthing out the truth of this whole situation, but they have just like committed this horribly indecent like abuse of this witness. Like, what? Or suspect rather. It was so crazy to me. I was like, oh. And then he's going to press charges because you absolutely can't do that. No? Okay. And then, yeah, pretty much the book is over. I don't have much else to say on that score, really. It really does just cliff dive, and it's the strangest thing because even if I was getting into the story, which I wasn't, it was poorly written, poorly characterized, the storytelling was poor, just poor, really. But even if I had been invested, to end it so unceremoniously, I was like, oh, did you even try? Like, do you care? Because I don't, not anymore. Um, and then there was some cocktail recipes at the back, which, sure, that's fun. And there was a playlist of songs as well, but the songs were just like semantically related to the book. Like they had titles that I guess were a bit grim. It was odd when one of the characters said that they really liked to listen to Tina Turner, that there were then no Tina Turner songs in the playlist. Like I find that quite. It was such an open goal, and who doesn't love Tina Turner? So yes, this I mean I gave it 2.25 stars. As I said in my October wrap up, I think that was being quite generous. I don't have any plans to read any future ML Rio books. I just, oil and water. I don't appreciate her way of writing. It's one of those things as well where I can see this doing very well on social media. Like I'm sure lots of people on Book Talk will praise it, but in the real world, like if anyone's accusing Book Talk of anti-intellectualism, this book is probably a culprit because it was just like, oh no, what's happened here? The shortlist for my November book club is dropping very soon, and I am just praying that we come up with something better than this. I mean, the bar is very low.